They wanted to hang an innocent woman. Lakota warrior saved her life and won her heart. The morning air in the small frontier settlement felt heavy, even before anyone understood why. The sun rose slowly over the wide land, casting a pale light across wooden homes, dusty paths, and fields that stretched far beyond the last fence. People moved about their usual routines, but something uneasy lingered in the atmosphere. A quiet worry passed from one person to another, like a whisper carried by the wind. No one could name it yet, but they all felt it. At the far edge of the settlement lived a young woman who kept mostly to herself. She had arrived there some years earlier, hoping for a simple life. She worked hard, spoke kindly, and never caused trouble. Many people knew her face, though few truly knew her story. She helped where she could, offered a smile when someone needed one, and spent her evenings in quiet reflection. Some neighbors appreciated her calm nature, while others found her silence mysterious. Still, she had never given anyone a reason to doubt her character. That morning began like any other for her. She stepped outside her small home, breathing in the cool air and looking at the distant hills. She planned to gather water, tend to her small garden, and prepare for the day. But before she could finish her first task, she noticed a strange stillness around the settlement. Groups of people stood together, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces looked tense. The usual greetings and nods were replaced with serious glances and quick steps. Soon word began to spread. Something had happened during the night. A tragic event had shaken the settlement, leaving people confused and afraid. No one had clear answers, only fragments of information and guesses. Fear moved quickly through the community, and with fear came suspicion. People began to search for someone to blame, someone to hold responsible so that their own worry might ease. At first, the young woman knew nothing of what had occurred. She continued her work, unaware that her quiet life was about to change. But as the morning went on, she started to notice people looking at her differently. Some avoided her eyes. Others whispered as she passed. She felt a knot of confusion tighten in her chest. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but the tension in the air made her hesitate. By midday, the rumors had grown louder. Someone had mentioned her name. Then another person repeated it. Soon, the whispers turned into direct stares. A few townspeople began to speak openly, suggesting that she might be connected to the tragedy. There was no real proof, only assumptions built on fear and misunderstanding. But in a place already on edge, assumptions were enough to ignite suspicion. The young woman felt the shift immediately. People she had greeted for years now stepped away from her path. A shopkeeper who once smiled at her refused to meet her eyes. Children who had played near her home were called back by their parents. She tried to ask what was happening, but no one gave her a clear answer. Instead, they offered short, tense replies or simply walked away. As the afternoon wore on, the situation grew more serious. A group of town leaders gathered to discuss what had happened and what should be done. They felt pressure from the frightened community. Everyone wanted quick action. They believed that if they found someone to blame, it would restore a sense of order. In their urgency, they focused on the young woman. She was quiet, somewhat distant, and easy to isolate. That was enough for suspicion to take root. When she was finally confronted, she stood in shock. She could hardly understand the accusations being thrown at her. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain that she knew nothing about the tragedy. She answered every question honestly, but the people around her seemed more interested in confirming their fears than listening to her words. The more she spoke, the more they doubted. The crowd grew larger as the day went on. Some people came out of curiosity, others out of anger, and many out of fear. They gathered near the center of the settlement, talking over one another and repeating rumors. The young woman felt the weight of their eyes pressing down on her. She had lived among these people for years, yet in that moment she felt like a stranger. A few individuals hesitated. They remembered her kindness and wondered if the accusations could be true. But their doubts were quiet and they did not speak up. It was easier to follow the crowd than to stand against it. The louder voices carried more influence, and those voices demanded swift judgment. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep shade of orange. The light cast long shadows across the ground, making the settlement look unfamiliar and tense. The young woman stood alone, surrounded by people who had already decided her fate in their minds. She felt fear rising within her, but she also felt a quiet strength. She knew she had done nothing wrong. She just hoped that someone, somewhere, would see the truth. Not far from the settlement, a Lakota warrior traveled along a path that wound through open land and scattered trees. He had been moving quietly, focused on his own journey. The wide sky and open plains were familiar to him, and he valued the peace they offered. But as he drew closer to the settlement, he sensed unrest. Smoke rose in thin lines, and distant voices carried on the wind. He stopped for a moment, listening. The sounds were not those of a normal day. There was tension in them, a sharpness that signaled trouble. He had seen such signs before and knew they often meant that fear had taken hold of a community. He considered continuing on his path, avoiding whatever conflict lay ahead. Yet something about the atmosphere made him pause. He soon heard fragments of conversation from travelers passing by. They spoke of a woman accused of wrongdoing, of a crowd growing restless, of leaders preparing to make a harsh decision. The warrior listened carefully. He knew how quickly fear could turn into injustice. He had witnessed it in many forms, and each time it left a deep mark on his heart. As he learned more, he felt a growing concern. The story did not sound complete. It sounded rushed, driven by panic rather than truth. He thought about his own people, and the many times they had been judged without being heard. The memory stirred a sense of responsibility within him. He believed that every person deserved a fair chance to speak and be understood. The warrior moved closer to the settlement, keeping to the edges where he could observe without being seen. From a distance he saw the crowd gathered and the young woman standing alone. He could sense her fear even from where he stood. The scene reminded him of moments in the past when a single voice of reason could have changed everything but never came. He did not know her name or her story, yet he felt certain that something was wrong. He decided to stay nearby and watch. He needed to understand the full situation before acting. Entering the settlement openly could put him in danger, especially in such a tense moment. But leaving without trying to help felt impossible. As the sun dipped lower, the settlement grew quieter but no less tense. Plans were being discussed. Decisions were being made. The young woman remained under watch, unsure of what would happen next. The warrior stayed in the shadows, thinking carefully about what he should do. He knew that stepping forward would require courage and calm. He would need to speak in a way that could cut through fear and reach the truth. He also knew that time was short. If no one intervened, the crowd's anger might lead to a terrible mistake. The night approached, and with it came a sense of urgency. The young woman looked up at the darkening sky, wondering if she would see another sunrise in freedom. The warrior looked toward the settlement, his mind set on one thought. He could not allow an innocent life to be lost to fear. The night settled slowly over the frontier settlement, but sleep did not come easily to anyone. Small lanterns glowed in windows, and quiet conversations continued behind closed doors. The air felt tense, as if the land itself were holding its breath. People whispered to one another, repeating the same fears again and again, hoping that speaking them aloud would make them feel safer. Instead, the rumors only grew stronger. At the edge of the settlement, the Lakota warrior remained hidden among the trees and tall grass. He watched the flickering lights and listened carefully to every sound that drifted toward him. He had chosen a place where he could see the main road and the open square without being noticed. From there he observed the movement of people, their hurried steps and their worried faces. He had heard enough to know that the young woman inside the settlement was being blamed for something she did not do, but he needed to understand how the situation had grown so serious. He knew that stepping into a frightened community could be dangerous. Many settlers did not trust outsiders, especially someone from a different background. Still, he could not ignore what he had seen. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. As the night grew darker, he moved quietly along the edge of the settlement. He stayed in the shadows, careful not to draw attention. From time to time he heard voices coming from homes or from groups gathered near the square. They spoke about the woman with certainty, even though their words were based on little more than fear and guesswork. Some people sounded angry, others sounded unsure, but went along with the louder voices. No one seemed to question whether the truth had truly been discovered. The warrior paused near a low fence and listened to a group of men talking. They spoke about the tragedy that had shaken the settlement and how quickly suspicion had fallen on the woman. One man admitted that there was no clear proof, but he still believed she must be responsible. Another man agreed, saying that someone had to answer for what had happened. Their words carried a mix of fear and frustration. They wanted an explanation, and they wanted it quickly. The warrior felt a heavy weight in his chest as he listened. He had seen this pattern before. When people were afraid, they often looked for a simple answer. They wanted someone to blame so they could feel in control again. But quick answers were not always true answers. He believed that truth required patience and careful thought, not panic and loud accusations. He moved on, keeping his steps quiet. As he walked, he thought about his own life and the lessons he had learned. He remembered times when his people had been judged without being heard. He remembered how easily fear could turn into unfair treatment. Those memories made him more certain that he could not stand by and do nothing. After a while, he found a spot where he could see the building where the young woman was being kept under watch. A small group of townspeople stood nearby, speaking in low voices. The woman herself sat quietly, guarded but not restrained. She looked tired and frightened, yet there was also a calm strength in her posture. She did not shout or beg. She simply waited, as if hoping that someone would listen to reason. The warrior studied her from a distance. He noticed the way she spoke when someone approached her. Her voice sounded steady, not desperate. She answered questions clearly, even when people spoke harshly to her. He saw no sign of guilt in her actions. Instead, he saw someone who was confused and hurt by the sudden change in how others treated her. He wondered how her life had been before this day. Perhaps she had lived quietly, helping others and keeping to herself. Perhaps she had built small friendships over time. All of that now seemed to be forgotten. Fear had erased the good memories people once had of her. They only saw what they believed in that moment. The warrior stayed hidden for a long time, watching and listening. He wanted to gather as much information as possible before making any decision. He noticed details that others seemed to overlook. He heard conflicting stories about the event that had caused the panic. Some people described it one way, while others described it differently. The more he listened, the more he realized that the truth was not as clear as the crowd believed. He also noticed that a few individuals looked uncertain. They did not join in the harsh words spoken about the woman. They stood quietly, as if unsure what to think. Yet none of them spoke up. They seemed afraid to go against the larger group. The warrior understood that fear could silence even kind-hearted people. Still, he believed that silence could allow a terrible mistake to happen. The night grew colder, and a gentle wind moved through the grass. The warrior wrapped his cloak more tightly around himself and continued to watch. He knew that the next day might bring a decision from the town leaders. If they chose to act without seeking the truth, the woman's life could be changed forever. He felt a sense of urgency building inside him. He thought carefully about what he should do. Entering the settlement openly could lead to conflict. Some people might not welcome his presence. Others might refuse to listen. But he also knew that if he remained silent, he would carry the weight of that choice for the rest of his life. He believed that every person deserved fairness and a chance to be heard. As he sat in the darkness, he remembered the teachings passed down by his elders. They had taught him that courage was not only shown in battle or in physical strength. True courage, they said, was standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. It meant speaking calmly when others were shouting, and seeking truth when others were blinded by fear. The warrior looked once more toward the woman. She sat with her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the ground. A lantern nearby cast a soft glow on her face. She looked exhausted, but not defeated. There was a quiet dignity about her that moved him deeply. He felt certain that she did not deserve what was happening. Slowly he made a decision. He would not rush in without thought. He would wait for the right moment, a moment when his words might be heard rather than rejected. He would observe a little longer and gather whatever details he could. When the time came, he would step forward and speak with calm and respect. He hoped that reason and patience might break through the wall of fear surrounding the settlement. The night continued, and the settlement gradually grew quieter. Some people returned to their homes, though few slept peacefully. The warrior remained awake, his mind focused and steady. He knew that the coming day would be important. It could bring either understanding or a terrible mistake. As the first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had not come to the settlement by chance. Something had drawn him there at exactly the right time. He believed that he was meant to witness what was happening and to act when the moment arrived. The young woman lifted her eyes toward the faint morning light. She did not know that someone nearby was watching over her, someone who believed in her innocence without ever having spoken to her. She only knew that she had to remain strong and hope that truth would find its way into the hearts of those around her. The warrior stood quietly at the edge of the land, ready to step forward when the time was right. He knew that what he did next could change everything, for the woman, for the settlement, and for himself. The morning arrived with a pale light that spread slowly across the settlement. The sky was clear, yet the mood among the people felt heavy and uncertain. A cool breeze moved through the wooden buildings and dusty paths, carrying with it the quiet tension that had grown through the night. No one spoke loudly. Even the animals seemed to sense that something serious was about to happen. The young woman had not slept. She sat near the small building where she was being watched, her hands resting in her lap. Her thoughts moved in circles. She kept replaying the last day in her mind, trying to understand how her life had changed so quickly. Just hours earlier, she had been living in peace. Now she found herself surrounded by doubt and fear. Still, she held on to a small thread of hope. She believed that truth had a way of coming forward, even when it was buried beneath loud voices and quick judgment. People began to gather in the open square as the sun rose higher. Some came because they were curious. Others came because they felt it was their duty to be present. A few came because they were still angry and wanted to see a decision made. The group grew larger with each passing moment. Faces showed a mix of emotions: fear, confusion, frustration, and uncertainty. No one seemed fully at ease. The leaders of the settlement stood near the center, speaking quietly among themselves. They knew that the community expected them to act. They also knew that whatever they decided would shape the future of the settlement. Pressure weighed heavily on them. They wanted to restore calm, but they also feared making the wrong choice. Even so, the loud voices in the crowd pushed them toward a quick decision. At the edge of the gathering, hidden among the trees and tall grass, the Lakota warrior watched carefully. He had spent the night thinking about what he should do. Now, as he saw the crowd forming and felt the urgency in the air, he understood that the moment to act was close. He could not remain in the shadows any longer. If he waited too long, it might be too late to change anything. He took a slow breath and stepped forward. His movements were calm and steady. He did not rush or show anger. He simply walked toward the settlement with a quiet confidence. A few people noticed him first and pointed. Soon others turned to look. His presence caused a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Conversation stopped. The crowd fell into a tense silence as he approached. Some people reacted with suspicion, others with surprise. It was not common to see a Lakota warrior step openly into the settlement, especially at such a tense time. But the warrior did not show fear. He kept his posture relaxed and his expression calm. He stopped at a respectful distance from the leaders in the gathered crowd. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the soft movement of the wind and the distant call of birds. Then the warrior raised his voice, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. He spoke with calm and respect. He said he had heard about the situation and had come to understand what was happening. He asked for permission to speak, not as an enemy or stranger, but as someone who cared about truth and fairness. The leaders exchanged uncertain glances. Some members of the crowd muttered among themselves. A few seemed ready to object, but the warrior's calm presence made it difficult to react with anger. His tone carried no threat. Instead, it carried a quiet strength that drew attention. After a brief moment, one of the leaders nodded slowly, allowing him to speak. The warrior began by asking simple questions. He asked what had truly happened and how the young woman had become the focus of blame. He listened carefully to the answers, never interrupting. As people spoke, he noticed how their stories did not fully match. Small details differed. Some parts were based on guesswork rather than facts. He pointed this out gently, encouraging them to think again. He then spoke about the importance of patience. He reminded them that fear could cloud judgment and that rushing to blame someone might lead to regret. His words were not harsh. They were thoughtful and steady. He spoke as someone who had seen similar situations before and understood how easily they could go wrong. The young woman listened from where she stood. At first, she could hardly believe that someone had stepped forward on her behalf. She watched the warrior with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had never met him before, yet he spoke with a sense of fairness that gave her strength. For the first time since the accusations began, she felt that someone truly wanted to understand the truth. Some people in the crowd grew uneasy as the warrior continued to speak. His questions made them reconsider what they thought they knew. A few began to whisper among themselves, realizing that they might have acted too quickly.
Others still felt angry but found it harder to express that anger.
The calm tone of the conversation made it difficult to shout or accuse. The warrior then asked if anyone had looked carefully at all the details of the event. Had they checked every possibility? Had they spoken to everyone who might know something? Had they considered that the real cause might be different from what they first believed? His questions hung in the air, inviting thought rather than demanding agreement. One of the leaders stepped forward and admitted that they had acted quickly. The community had been frightened, and they wanted to restore order. But now, hearing the warrior's words, he realized that more time and care were needed. He suggested that they pause and look again at the evidence, rather than making a final decision in haste. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some people nodded, relieved by the suggestion. Others remained uncertain, yet the tension that had filled the air began to ease slightly. The presence of calm reasoning created space for doubt, and doubt created space for truth to emerge. The warrior did not claim to have all the answers. Instead, he offered to help search for them. He spoke about working together to understand what had really happened. He reminded them that justice meant finding the truth, not simply choosing the easiest explanation. His words carried a quiet sincerity that touched many hearts. As the discussion continued, small details began to surface. Details that had been overlooked in the rush to blame someone. A few people recalled things they had seen or heard that did not match the accusations against the young woman. Slowly, the story began to shift. The certainty that had once filled the crowd weakened, replaced by careful thought. The young woman felt a wave of relief, though she remained cautious. She knew that the situation was not yet resolved, but she could see that the mood of the crowd was changing. People were no longer looking at her with the same harsh certainty. Some even looked ashamed of how quickly they had judged her. The warrior remained calm throughout it all. He did not celebrate or show pride. He simply continued to encourage patience and understanding. He believed that truth should come forward naturally, without force. His presence alone seemed to steady the crowd, reminding them that fairness required courage. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the settlement stood at a turning point. The anger that had nearly taken control of the situation began to fade. In its place grew a quiet determination to find the real answers. The leaders agreed to pause any harsh decisions and to examine the situation more carefully. For the first time since the trouble began, hope returned to the young woman's heart. He looked at the warrior with gratitude, knowing that his courage had given her a chance to be heard. He met her gaze briefly and nodded, as if to say that truth was worth standing for, no matter the risk. The day moved forward with a new sense of purpose. The crowd slowly dispersed, no longer driven by fear but by a desire to understand. The warrior stayed nearby, ready to help in whatever way he could. He knew that the path ahead might still be difficult, but he also knew that the most important step had already been taken, the step toward truth. The settlement did not return to normal right away after the tense morning. Even though the crowd had stepped back from making a rushed decision, the air still felt heavy with unease. People moved more slowly, spoke more quietly, and avoided meeting each other's eyes. It was as if everyone had suddenly realized how close they had come to making a terrible mistake. That realization left a deep silence hanging over the place. The young woman remained in the small building for a while longer, not because she was still under harsh watch, but because the leaders wanted time to sort through everything calmly. She did not argue. She understood that trust, once shaken, did not return in a single moment. Still, the fear that had gripped her heart began to loosen. For the first time since the accusations had begun, she felt that she might be given a fair chance. Outside, the Lakota warrior stayed nearby, though he kept a respectful distance. He did not want to appear as if he were forcing his presence on anyone. He understood that the settlement needed space to think clearly. Yet he also knew that leaving too soon might allow confusion to return. So he stayed quietly, offering help only when asked. The leaders gathered inside a simple wooden hall to talk. They spoke about what had happened, about how quickly fear had spread, and about the need to correct their mistake. Some of them admitted that they had felt pressured by the crowd. Others confessed that they had not taken enough time to look at the full situation. It was not easy for them to say these things aloud, but they knew it was necessary. They decided to speak again with everyone who might have information. This time they listened more carefully. They asked calm questions and allowed people to think before answering. As they did, new details began to surface. Small pieces of truth, overlooked in the rush of fear, slowly formed a clearer picture. The more they learned, the more obvious it became that the young woman had not caused the tragedy at all. It had been a misunderstanding, made worse by panic and quick judgment. When the leaders finally stepped outside to share what they had learned, the crowd gathered once more. This time the mood was different. Instead of loud demands, there was a quiet expectation. People stood close together but spoke in low voices. Many of them felt nervous about what would be said. Some felt ashamed for how they had acted. Others simply hoped that the truth would bring peace. The leader who stepped forward looked tired but determined. He spoke clearly so that everyone could hear. He explained that the young woman was not responsible for what had happened. He admitted that the settlement had acted too quickly and that fear had guided their actions. He asked the community to accept the truth and to make things right. A hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, no one moved. Then a few people lowered their heads. Others looked toward the young woman, who stood quietly nearby. She did not speak. She only watched, her expression calm but guarded. She had waited a long time to hear those words, yet the memory of the accusation still lingered. One by one, people began to step forward. Some offered quiet apologies. Others simply nodded in her direction, unsure of what to say. A few struggled to find the courage to meet her eyes. It was not easy for them to admit that they had been wrong, but the presence of the warrior, standing calmly at the edge of the gathering, seemed to encourage honesty. His earlier words about patience and fairness had stayed in their minds. The young woman listened to each apology with a gentle nod. She did not show anger, though she had every reason to feel hurt. Instead, she chose calmness. She knew that holding on to bitterness would only make the healing slower. Still, she did not pretend that everything was suddenly fine. Trust would take time to rebuild. After the crowd slowly dispersed, the settlement felt quieter than it had in days. People returned to their homes, deep in thought. Some spoke with their families about what had happened and what they had learned. Others sat alone, reflecting on how easily fear had guided their actions. The experience left a mark on everyone.
The young woman stepped outside into the open air.
The sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in days, she felt able to breathe freely. She walked a short distance from the buildings, needing space to think. Her heart still felt tender, but it also felt strong. She had faced something frightening and had come through it with dignity. The Lakota warrior approached slowly, making sure not to startle her. He stopped at a respectful distance and offered a quiet greeting. She turned and met his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. They did not need many words to understand what had passed between them. His presence had helped change the course of events, and she felt a deep gratitude. They began to talk quietly, sharing simple words at first. She thanked him for speaking up when no one else would. He replied that he only did what he believed was right. He explained that he had seen similar situations before and knew how dangerous they could become. She listened carefully, realizing that his courage had come from experience and compassion. Over the next few days, the settlement slowly began to heal. Life returned to its routines, though with a new sense of awareness. People greeted one another more thoughtfully. Conversations carried a gentler tone. The memory of what had almost happened stayed fresh in their minds, reminding them to act with care. The young woman worked to rebuild her daily life. She returned to her garden, to her small chores, and to the simple routines that had once brought her peace. Some neighbors offered help. Others gave her space. She accepted both with quiet grace. She did not rush to trust again, but she allowed the possibility of trust to grow slowly. The warrior remained in the area for a short while longer. He helped where he could, offering guidance and support without drawing attention to himself. His calm presence became a steady influence. People began to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who had helped them find clarity. A few even approached him to express their thanks. During this time, he and the young woman spoke often. Their conversations were simple but meaningful. They talked about their lives, their hopes, and the lessons they had learned. They discovered that both of them valued honesty, kindness, and courage. A quiet friendship formed, built on respect and understanding. Evenings became moments of reflection. The sky would turn shades of gold and purple, and the land would grow peaceful again. The young woman often sat outside watching the horizon. Sometimes the warrior joined her, and they shared stories of their past. There was no rush, no pressure, just a calm sense of connection that grew stronger with time. The settlement, too, began to change. The experience had taught its people something important. They realized that fear could lead them in the wrong direction if they were not careful. They learned the value of listening and thinking before acting. Slowly, trust returned, not just for the young woman, but within the community as a whole. Though the memory of those tense days would never fully disappear, it became a lesson rather than a wound. The young woman carried it with quiet strength. The warrior carried it as a reminder of why he had chosen to step forward. Together, they had helped guide the settlement back toward fairness and understanding. As the days passed and the land settled into calm once more, a sense of quiet hope took root. The worst had been avoided. Truth had been given a chance to shine through. And from that difficult moment, something new had begun to grow, something built on courage, patience, and the simple belief that every life deserves to be heard and valued. The days that followed were gentle yet full of change. The settlement, once tense and fearful, began to feel like a community again. People moved about their work with a new awareness in their steps. They spoke more carefully, listened more thoughtfully, and seemed determined not to let panic rule their actions again. The experience had left a deep impression on everyone, teaching a lesson that would not be forgotten. The young woman slowly rebuilt her life. She returned to her small home and tended her garden, taking comfort in the quiet routines she had once loved. Every task she completed, from sweeping the floor to watering her plants, gave her a sense of stability. The garden, with its soft colors and fresh scent, became a place of healing for her, a reminder that life could continue even after fear and uncertainty. Some neighbors returned to greet her warmly, though it took time. They approached with hesitation, afraid of reopening old wounds, yet determined to make amends. The young woman accepted their gestures with quiet grace. She did not rush into trusting anyone fully, but she allowed small acts of kindness to reach her heart. Her strength and calmness inspired those around her, teaching them that forgiveness and patience could rebuild trust in ways anger and judgment never could. The Lakota warrior remained nearby for a while, though he never demanded attention or recognition. He moved quietly, helping where he could and offering advice only when asked. His presence was steady and reassuring. For the first time, some people saw him not as a stranger, but as a guide, someone who had helped restore balance in a time of chaos. They began to respect his wisdom, even if they did not fully understand his ways. During this period, the young woman and the warrior grew closer. They shared conversations that were simple, yet full of meaning. They spoke of their lives, the paths that had brought them to that moment, and the lessons they had learned from their experiences. He told her stories of his people, stories filled with courage, patience, and respect for life. She spoke of her dreams for the future, of a life filled with peace and hope. They spent hours walking through the fields and along the edges of the settlement, speaking softly and observing the world around them. The warrior had a way of listening that made the young woman feel heard in a way she never had before. She noticed how he watched the small details, the patterns in the wind, the way sunlight touched the grass, the subtle expressions of people around them. He taught her to see the world with attention and care, to notice the beauty that often went unseen. In return, she shared with him the lessons she had learned from her own life. She spoke of kindness, quiet strength, and the importance of remaining calm in the face of fear. She told him how easy it had been for people to judge without understanding, and how difficult it had been to face that judgment alone. The warrior listened carefully, valuing her words as much as his own experiences. As the settlement slowly returned to a normal rhythm, others began to notice the change in the young woman. She moved with quiet confidence, spoke with calm assurance, and treated others with kindness even when they had doubted her. People began to approach her, seeking guidance or simply wishing to speak. Her strength had become a subtle inspiration, showing them that resilience could shine even in dark times. The warrior, too, observed how people responded. He could see the small shifts in their attitudes. He noted how the settlement had learned to pause, to listen, and to seek understanding before acting. His heart felt lightened by the knowledge that his actions had helped guide the community toward fairness and thoughtfulness. He understood that courage was not only in bold gestures but also in standing firmly for truth and justice when it mattered most. Over time, the bond between the young woman and the warrior deepened. They relied on each other not out of necessity but out of respect and shared understanding. They had both faced challenges alone, and now they found comfort in one another's presence. Their connection was quiet, growing naturally through shared experiences, mutual respect, and the gentle moments of everyday life. One afternoon, they walked together to a hill overlooking the settlement. The sun was low in the sky, painting the fields with warm shades of gold and amber. The young woman looked down at the place she had once feared and then turned to the warrior. She spoke softly about how different life felt now, how much she had learned about strength, patience, and trust. He nodded, understanding without needing words the depth of her meaning. They continued to spend time together, helping where they could in the settlement, offering guidance to those who sought it, and sharing simple joys in each other's company. Their companionship became a quiet symbol of hope, showing that understanding and respect could build bridges even in a world filled with fear and misunderstanding.
As weeks turned into months, the young woman's reputation in the settlement changed.
People no longer saw her as someone to fear or doubt. They recognized her kindness, her calm strength, and the courage she had shown in a moment when others had judged too quickly. Slowly, the community began to trust her again. Children smiled at her as she passed, neighbors greeted her warmly, and conversations once heavy with suspicion now carried a tone of respect. The warrior's presence continued to be a steady influence. He did not stay out of desire for recognition, but because he understood the value of guiding others with wisdom and calm. Over time, his actions inspired some members of the settlement to be more thoughtful in their decisions, more patient in their judgments, and more willing to listen before acting. The lessons he had quietly shared began to take root in the hearts of many. One evening, as the sun set over the settlement, the young woman and the warrior sat together under the open sky. The land stretched endlessly around them, calm and peaceful. They spoke of life, of the past, and of what they hoped for the future. They laughed quietly, shared small stories, and listened to the sounds of the evening, the wind through the grass, the distant calls of animals, and the soft voices of people returning home. In that quiet moment, both understood the depth of their bond. It was not a bond born of grand gestures or dramatic events, but of shared experience, understanding, and respect. They had faced fear and uncertainty, yet they had found strength and trust. Together, they had helped change the course of events not through force, but through courage, patience, and the belief that truth and compassion would always matter. The young woman knew she would never forget the days when her life had been at risk. She also knew that she had grown stronger because of them. The warrior knew that he had made a difference not only for her but for the community as a whole. And though the future was not certain, they both felt a quiet confidence that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The settlement continued to thrive, shaped by the lessons it had learned. Fear no longer ruled as easily, and the people had seen the power of patience, understanding, and speaking for what was right. The young woman continued to live her life with quiet strength and dignity. The warrior remained a gentle presence, guiding and sharing wisdom. Their story, though simple and full of quiet moments, became a lasting example. It showed that courage was not only in actions of battle, but in standing for truth, defending the innocent, and showing compassion when fear threatened to take control. In the end, the young woman and the warrior moved forward together, carrying the lessons of the past, the strength of the present, and the hope of a peaceful future. Life returned to its rhythm, but with new meaning. Every sunrise reminded them of the strength they had found, the trust they had rebuilt, and the connection that had grown between them. Their hearts were full of understanding, their minds clearer, and their spirits steady. And though the world around them remained unpredictable, they had learned that courage, patience, and compassion could light the way through even the darkest moments. The young woman, once accused and feared, now walked through the settlement with confidence and peace. The warrior, who had chosen to act when others hesitated, remained by her side not as a protector out of duty, but as a partner, a friend, and a companion in a life that had been forever changed by courage and understanding. Together they faced each day with hope, their bond a reminder that even in the most difficult times, truth, kindness, and patience could guide the way.